Thank you very much for being here today. Good morning to that part of the world who is just starting the day. Good afternoon to Europe, and good evening to our friends in the Asia Pacific area. We are the United Nations Industrial Development Organization, and UN Specialized Agency on Industrial Development, and we're really pleased to have you all here on this webinar on standards and for low carbon hydrogen. Without further ado, let me just share some of the rules of the session. You will see some buttons on the interpretation on the lower part of your screen. Please select the interpretation that is most appropriate for you. We have in French and Spanish. Nous avons de l'interprétation pour les personnes qui nous joignent des autres pays. Vous pouvez trouver les boutons d'interprétation en bas de l'écran. Juste choisissez l'interprétation de français dans ce cas-là. Tenemos interpretación en español. Si pueden ver abajo de su pantalla un botón sobre interpretación y escoger en español para escuchar las presentaciones en español. Estamos grabando, we're recording this session. This session will be available in our website later, together with questions. We encourage you to put questions, ask questions in the Q&A button. Please use the Q&A button to pose your questions. We just want to thank you all. We have received, I see that there are many participants still joining the webinar. Let me share that we have received a very overwhelming interest to this workshop, to this webinar. Around 300 participants have registered from 70 countries, of which 52 are developing countries. So without further ado, let us start with our opening remarks from our partners. And I will start with Petra Schreiber, who is the Chief of the Climate and Technology Partnerships at UNIDO. Petra, over to you.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. Hello, bonjour, bienvenidos. It's a big pleasure to be here today with you, and a big thanks to all the co-workers that make this webinar possible, especially thanks to our friends from the ISO, from the Hydro Council, and also to my team, Juan Pablo, Magde, and Yunji, who worked hard to make this happening, and also to all our speakers. Hydrogen is very close to UNIDO's heart, and also to the heart of our Director General. In this sense, we launched our global program for hydrogen in industry, which is aligned with the mandate of UNIDO for bringing forward an inclusive and sustainable industrial development. We see hydrogen as it has the potential to be a game changer if you get it right, if you consider social and environmental issues, and if you also allow, and I'm really saying allow, developing and transition countries to come in and to benefit of this so-called fuel of the future. In our program, we aim to inspire local production and application of hydrogen in industries in developing and transition country. However, of course, we want to contribute also to a fair trade and bring as many players into this trade as possible. In our program, we have started in 2021, and we did quite some analysis. What are the key elements why this game changer, or the fuel of the future, is not actually taking off as planned, or is taking longer than we thought? And there are many opportunities, but also key challenges. And during this, especially this year and next year, we aim to address this. And these are ranging from policies. We need to create the right policies to enable the framework for bringing forward hydrogen production. And here we are working closely with ARENA, with the International Renewable Energy Agency. Standards, key element. This is why we're very happy to team up with ISO and other partners to bring this forward. We also see a need for creating new financing and financing instruments to bring forward as many investments as possible. Here we're teaming up with World Bank and with the UK Breakthrough Agenda. Last but not least, there is also a need for a better coordination. It's a global coordination, and we are very happy to contribute to this further. And we are supported by the government of Austria, Germany, Italy, and China. And I hope we will bring in more partners very soon to support us. Back to you, Juan Pablo.
Thank you, Petra. As mentioned, we have the Global Partnership for Green Hydrogen in Industry, and we are very thankful for our partners here today that have collaborated to make this possible. One of the key partners is ISO, as it was mentioned, and with more than 40 years, we have fruitful collaboration with ISO in different areas. And this partnership is always in response in anticipation of the increasing importance of international standards, what international standards role is in policy, market, safety, security, innovation, and sustainable development. And with that, I'll give the floor to Andrea from ISO Central Secretariat. She is External Relations Manager. Over to you, Andrea.
Gracias, Juan Pablo. I'm happy I got to say that in Spanish at least. Thank you very much to our colleagues in UNIDO for hosting this workshop today. With a memorandum of understanding from 2009 and a joint declaration that's going to be signed soon, ISO and UNIDO have a long-standing relationship. We are committed to working together on sustainability issues, support for small and medium enterprises, and the development and promotion of low-carbon hydrogen standards, among others. For the Hydrogen Council, ISO has been working together to create partnerships around the low-carbon value chain. The aim is to bring all relevant stakeholders to the table and ensure that all voices are heard. Together, these three organizations are working to support developing countries in achieving a clean energy transition by scaling up low-carbon hydrogen production. ISO, as the world leader in international standardization, has already published several standards for environmental management and climate change, like on the quantification and reporting of greenhouse gas emissions. This work is developed by ISO Technical Committee 207, Environmental Management. Also, since the 1990s, ISO has a Technical Committee on Hydrogen Technologies, ISO TC 197, which has developed a suite of safety standards that allow the safe development of hydrogen system. Specifically, Subcommittee 1, created last year, focuses on the standardization of large-scale hydrogen energy system. Andrei Tuchelev, chair of the subcommittee, will go into more detail during his presentation. Hydrogen production projects need not only to meet low carbon footprint objectives, but also to meet high safety standards. Therefore, international standards are crucial to tackling climate change and supporting energy transition, especially for developing countries. What we're witnessing today is a good example of how international cooperation to address global challenges should look like. However, this cooperation can only reach its full potential if developing countries' needs and challenges are considered. For that, they need to sit at the table. Developing countries must participate in the development of international standards from the onset to become standards makers and not standard takers. I wish you all a fruitful workshop. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrea. As mentioned, we are partnering with Hydrogen Council. And as introduced by Andrea, we have Dr. Andrei Tuchelev, who is the Director of Safety and Regulatory at the Hydrogen Council, and who happens to be also the chair of the ISO TC 197 SC1. You will be listening to him later, which is the core of our presentation, but I leave the floor now for him to give us some introductory remarks. Andrei, over to you.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. Thank you, Andrea, for this introduction as well of the ISO. So as Juan Pablo mentioned, I wear two hats. I'm Director of Safety Regulatory Hydrogen Council and also Chair of the subcommittee in ISO TC 197. That's really one of the motivators for having this arrangement for this webinar is our committee established the liaison with UNIDO and other intergovernmental organizations. So from the Hydrogen Council perspective, it's the relatively young organization, but it's already acting as a thought leader for the hydrogen global industry, representing almost 150 members globally, employing over 7 million people. So it's a significant initiative that allows us to identify issues that may be a problem for the deployment of hydrogen economy and bring clarity and precision to identifying what are the best pathways and setting collaborations with the stakeholders like UNIDO and other intergovernmental organizations. Within the council, we have two key programs, safety and regulatory that I lead, and also sustainability that my colleague, Daria Nochevnik, leads, that she's going to speak very soon. Within the ISO, we also have the ISO TC 197. We also have been working diligently to bring developing countries into the picture. And my good friend and colleague, Professor Jinya Chen, who's going to speak very soon, is a special advisor for the technical committee for developing countries, serving as the vice chair for a number of years, and now the special advisor. So we have been paying close attention to that within the Hydrogen Council and within the ISO TC 197. So hopefully within the next presentations, we will highlight the work that Hydrogen Council is doing and what the ISO TC 197 is doing to help put the safety standards as well as the sustainability dimension on the global stage in terms of the hydrogen technologies. So over to you, Pablo. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrei. And this leads us to the start of the webinar. As you may have seen in the agenda, the storyline that we want to follow during this 2 hours, nearly 2 hours that we will be, is first to have an overview of the renewable and low carbon hydrogen. What is the status now? For that, we will have Daria Nochevnik, Director of Policy and Partnerships of the Hydrogen Council. We will have, after the ISO TC 197 Special Advisor, Dr. Jingwan Zheng, to present some examples of how China is doing and how developing countries can also look forward in the production and development of the green hydrogen. From there, we will see the role of ISO more in detail and how developing countries can participate in international standard setting. For those countries who are not in the discussions right now, as Andrea mentioned, to be in the discussion, to be standard makers and not standard takers. And we will, large part of the presentation, we will go more into deep on the introduction of the ISO TC 197 and the relevant technical committees. What is being discussed right now at those committees that can support or impact more, can impact the countries and the projects that are now being developed or planned in developing countries. Without further ado, I give the floor to Daria Nochevnik. She's the Director for Policy and Partnerships at the Hydrogen Council. Over to you, Daria.
Thank you very much, Juan Pablo. I will be putting my slides on screen now. Let me check whether you can see them okay, and can you hear me okay as well? Excellent. Well, thank you so much again to you, Juan Pablo, to Petra, and our colleagues in UNIDO for your leadership and for organizing this webinar to focus really on the role of global international standards in the development of the hydrogen economy, in particular, zooming in on the role of the developing countries in standard setting, which is indeed a crucial topic. In this opening presentation, I will talk a little bit about the status of the global hydrogen industry, about our outlook for the development of cross-border trade flows, and how indeed we see the crucial role for the emerging market economies in the future global hydrogen ecosystem. And finally, talk about the role, of course, of the relevant sustainability standards and the just approach to the development of the hydrogen economy in all corners of the world, and how indeed we can maximize the benefits as far as the socioeconomic benefits in particular are concerned of hydrogen for the developing countries. Andrei already mentioned that a few words about the Hydrogen Council, and many of you may be familiar with this organization. We today, as Andrei mentioned already, represent over 150 industrial leaders in hydrogen. Data is very much in our DNA. We are a data-driven organization, and we have built our reputation thanks to the techno-economic assessment of the development of hydrogen technologies and value chains. And we work very closely on supporting the delivery of global standards, in particular ISO standards for the hydrogen industry, but also work on a number of other areas that are relevant to the emerging hydrogen economy, which I will talk about in a moment. And we work very closely with government-to-government organizations. We have strong partnerships with IRENA, with IEA, Clean Energy Ministerial, and of course ISO, and we are enjoying and we are delighted to have close cooperation with UNIDO as well. This is a brief snapshot of our program portfolio. We do a lot of work on capturing and looking at what the status of the global industry is today, collecting data from across our membership, so looking at what really is the status of hydrogen projects globally. This work is carried out in the Industry Evolution program that we have. We have a dedicated program dealing with safety and regulatory matters, and Andrei is leading this program within the council. We work on finance and bankability issues as well, and we have dedicated investor group with banks, investment companies, and sovereign wealth funds. And importantly for our discussion today, we have a dedicated sustainability program where we work on supporting the development of standards for assessment of various sustainability attributes of hydrogen and derivatives. We support the development of certification schemes for hydrogen, and importantly, look at unlocking and helping unlock the SDG dimension of the hydrogen economy, so how hydrogen can contribute to the UN Sustainable Development Goals globally. Just a few words about the state of the global industry. Zooming out, we have, end of last year, we have published our annual Hydrogen Insights report, where we capture the status quo of the global sector. We see that when it comes to project announcements and proposals, Europe is currently in the lead, in particular on renewable hydrogen projects. And looking at proposals specifically, and I underline the word proposal because proposal does not equal final investment decision. It doesn't equal project delivery. From this perspective, Europe is currently in the lead. We see that China is actually in the lead on the actual deployment of electrolyzers with over 200 megawatt of installed capacity already. And Japan and South Korea are very much leading on the deployment of fuel cells, with indeed more than half of the world's manufacturing capacity, equaling some 11 gigawatt today. More generally, I would also mention that the project pipeline, the pipeline of mature hydrogen projects, is growing across geographies, and we see that nearly 240 billion of US dollars in equivalent of project is proposed across geographies. However, less than 10% of these projects have been FID'd, have saw the final investment decision, meaning less than 10% have been committed today. And we see that in order to unlock the climate benefits of hydrogen, we really need to speed up deployment on the ground. In fact, in order to be on track with our net zero targets and to allow hydrogen to contribute to our common decarbonization objectives, we need to step up the amount of capital that is committed to the hydrogen industry. The the amount can be seen as significant, because we are looking at indeed a figure that is equivalent to 15% of the investments that were committed to upstream oil and gas sector in the last decade. But again, 15% of investments committed to oil and gas sector in the past decade, 1.5 orders of magnitude. This amount is well within reach, and it is indeed crucial to right now to proceed from project proposals to investments. This is the key priority that we see for industry and governments to work together towards unlocking deployment on the ground. We have done some work on looking at not only what's happening in the industry and when it comes to project development today, but also looking ahead, how could global cross-border trade flows in hydrogen and derivatives shape up between now and 2050. We have actually modeled more than 1.5 million potential trade routes, and we have identified out of all of these trade routes, some 40 potential trade routes that are likely to emerge. We see that if we indeed are able to unlock these global cross-border trades, we can accelerate indeed the pathway towards net zero, while at the same time achieving massive cost savings. We're looking at cost reductions, orders of magnitude 25%, equaling some $6 trillion in US dollars in investments by mid-century. So this is indeed very substantial. And this, unlocking these investments and those trade corridors would of course mean that the geopolitics of global cross-border trade in energy and in commodities is going to evolve and change. And we see a picture where the supply routes for some of the major demand pool regions are going to be much more diversified as opposed to the status quo. So in our study, we have identified some key phases in which the cross-border trade in hydrogen derivatives would evolve. And we see that in the first phase, especially between now and 2030, 2035, we see and we expect high uptake in hydrogen derivatives, in particular ammonia and synthetic fuels. And then between 2035 and 2040, the pipeline infrastructure will be maturing and expanding in parallel with the liquid hydrogen infrastructure. So we see pipeline infrastructure and liquid hydrogen infrastructure picking up after 2035 and maturing in parallel with the development, with continued development of the shipments in hydrogen derivatives. Now, I have mentioned this already, but we see indeed that emerging market economies can play a significant role in this global hydrogen value chain that will be emerging over time. And we see that some countries and regions, in particular the likes of Latin America, Namibia, and South Africa, are going to become some prime destinations in terms of the development of, for example, synthetic kerosene and the export of it globally. Brazil is likely to be one of the leading players in green steel, and there we expect that some countries, in particular in the Middle East and Chile, will emerge as the most cost-competitive suppliers of renewable hydrogen and low-carbon hydrogen globally. So by 2050, the hydrogen costs could be brought down to less than $1 per kilo of hydrogen, thanks to the exceptional solar potential, of course, supported by wind, enabling renewable hydrogen production, and in the case of the Middle East, lowest cost natural gas coupled with CCS. So we see Chile, Qatar, Oman, Saudi Arabia, and UAE being going forward, some of the lowest cost suppliers of hydrogen, of renewable hydrogen in particular, globally. Now, this is just a snapshot of the picture that we and the modeling work that we have done that shows how by mid-century, more than 70% of hydrogen that is traded globally is expected to come from renewable sources, if not more. So, overwhelmingly, the majority of the prospective trade flows will be focused on renewable hydrogen, and indeed, emerging market economies can play a significant role in this global hydrogen ecosystem that will be and is already emerging. Interestingly, we have also looked at the role of critical raw materials in the development of hydrogen ecosystems. And here, again, one of the key takeaways is that we absolutely need hydrogen technologies to ensure that we don't substitute one dependency for another. A number of countries around the world currently are really concerned about dependency on either a specific type of energy source or a specific type of manufacturing supply chain component that is necessary for their economies to function. And we see that with hydrogen and hydrogen fuel cell technologies, there's a real opportunity to ensure the sort of technological diversification that is absolutely crucial for us to secure not only our transition to net zero and our decarbonization pathway, but also making sure that security of supply is achieved by way of not only trade flow diversification and commodity diversification, but also diversification of the core materials that are used in the supply chains of the clean energy solutions. And in the case of hydrogen technologies, by far we see that the critical materials that are needed for hydrogen are sufficient. There are well-established practices as regards the circularity and in the recycling approaches, and of course the overall value chain of those critical materials used in particular renewable hydrogen technologies is carried out in line with the world-class sustainability practices. So just to flag that it is an interesting and important angle to the hydrogen economy development, and we encourage you to have a look at the report that we have published recently. But going back to the to our topic on the development of the global hydrogen ecosystem and the role of standards in particular, we have talked about the cross-border value chains. We have talked about how there is an opportunity to create new trade corridors between the emerging countries, the emerging market economies and developed countries. And of course, part of the development of this new ecosystem has to do with the build out of the hardware, so the technologies, the infrastructure. And another significant part is the development of the software, meaning the standards, the regulations, and policies. And as was mentioned already by our speakers previously, we truly believe that it is crucial that emerging market economies take full part in the development and the shaping of the global standards, and rather than being standard takers, are indeed standard makers and contribute to the development of common global industry standards. Within the Council, we are very much supporting, of course, the development of the relevant ISO standards, in particular, the standard methodology for assessing the carbon footprint of hydrogen production, conditioning, and transport. And I'm sure that Andrei is going to talk more about this process in a few minutes, as well as the development of certification schemes for hydrogen. And the two, of course, go very much hand in hand. Oh, sorry. I will skip through the slide briefly because I'm sure that again Andrei will elaborate on it more. But we see that the very foundation for the development of relevant hydrogen policies is around ensuring that we use a common methodology for assessing the carbon footprint of hydrogen production, conditioning, and transport in a way that is harmonized and coherent. Oftentimes we talk about the development of different thresholds for hydrogen, for example, or derivatives, and country A can have a threshold, let's say, of 2 kilos of CO2 equivalent per kilo of hydrogen, and country B can have a threshold of 2 kilos of CO2 equivalent per kilo of hydrogen. But those 2 and 2 effectively may not be comparable unless there is a common methodology to calculate and to arrive to those 2 kilos. So we see this standard methodology in particular as being the foundation for the development of the hydrogen economy and some of the policy choices that may be made in different corners of the world over the types of hydrogen that countries may wish to support. And this is a way to ensure that there's transparency provided at a global level, and in particular, allowing the least carbon-intensive solution to shine and the least carbon-intensive hydrogen production and transport pathway to shine and to reveal their climate benefits. So we see this as an absolutely crucial piece, and I'm sure that Andrei will elaborate on it going forward. And just very briefly on the relationship between standards, policies, and certification schemes. Oftentimes, those may be used interchangeably, but we feel that it's really important to lay out the differences and the interlinkages between these clearly. So we see that ISO standards already play a crucial role in underpinning some of the global policies and policies adopted at national level. For example, the EU taxonomy for sustainable finance that lays out the rule for qualifying hydrogen manufacturing as a sustainable economic activity refers to the ISO standards in order to, by way of the one of the options to assess in particular the carbon footprint of that hydrogen manufacturing process. So already ISO standards are informing national policies and regional policies. And going forward, they will play a crucial role in informing also certification schemes for hydrogen that are used to evidence that a certain unit of hydrogen has a certain carbon footprint, but also has relevant, perhaps, socioeconomic attributes and those relating to other types of and other elements of the sustainability characteristics of hydrogen beyond carbon footprint. And we see that indeed the standards and certification schemes that are used to evidence various types of sustainability attributes, they can be used by governments and relevant legislators as they create their compliance frameworks. These can be policies such as targets, quotas, or other types of demand pull measures. And they can also be used on a voluntary basis by companies as they seek to implement relevant reporting and disclosure frameworks and for their reporting and disclosure obligations, so in particular corporate reporting and ESG reporting.
Daria, may I ask you to wrap up?
Yeah, absolutely.
I know you are on the last slides. Thank you,
Sure,
Daria.
sure. Thank you, Juan Pablo. I think that this is a key slide because it shows the interdependencies and the links between standards, certification schemes, policies, so compliance frameworks, and voluntary corporate reporting and disclosure frameworks. Now, I would just mention that of course, standards and sustainability standards in particular play an absolutely critical role, again, in informing policy choices. We have carried out an analysis of existing policies and instruments that drive the need for evidencing the sustainability of attributes of both hydrogen and derivatives. This snapshot, and again, I'm not going to go, of course, I'm not going to go through all the details here in the interest of time, but it gives you a flavor of the diversity in approaches that we see in terms of the sort of choices and the policy choices regarding the types of sustainability attributes that governments wish to evidence as part of their compliance frameworks, and the approaches to evidencing that they choose. And I would mention that this diversity of approaches is something that we have analyzed and looked at very closely, and it informed some of the work that we are doing currently, and we're pleased to say that very soon we will be publishing a dedicated certification study that we have carried out, focusing in particular on how one can identify solutions for different approaches to evidencing the sustainability attributes through certification to talk to each other, and how we can achieve a form of common ground for governments across jurisdictions and for relevant legislators across jurisdiction to commit to mutual recognition between certification schemes for hydrogen and derivatives. I'll stop here, but I would say again and emphasize that we see an absolutely crucial role for global international standards to inform certification schemes, and this is a good example of a tangible instrument that is required for the market to take off. Thank you.
Thank you, Daria. For the sake of time, I will introduce the next presenter. Our next presenter is Dr. Yinghan Zheng from the ISO TC 197. He's a special advisor for developing countries, and he will be presenting some examples of what has been happening in China. Over to you, Dr. Yinghan. While we set up the presentation, I would like to ask our attendees, our participants, please put your questions in the question and answer button. We will be looking at the questions. It is very important for us to know what is your questions, what is your interest. If we can resolve it, answer it during this workshop, at the end of the workshop, we will. If not, it is also helpful for us to know how can we move forward in other type of webinars, in other thematic webinars. So please put your questions in the question and answer. And now over to you, Mr. Dr. Yinghan.
Hello, everyone. I'm Yinghan Zheng. It's my pleasure to participate in the webinar. Thank Dr. Angela for your invitation. And the title of my presentation is China Experience with Deploying Low Carbon Hydrogen Project. Sorry. First, I will talk about the policy and the planning, then go to development of hydrogen energy, low carbon hydrogen project, and finally give some suggestion. Last year, as the National Development and Reform Commission and the National Energy Administration released a plan for the development of hydrogen energy. The document points out hydrogen is an important part of the national energy system. Hydrogen is an important carrier to green and low carbon transformation of energy and industrial department. Hydrogen is also an important direction of strategic emerging industries and the future industry. And also in last year, China released the 14th five-year plan on renewable energy development, a comprehensive blueprint for first accelerating China's renewable energy and fuel cell vehicle technology research and development has been a highlight of the Ministry of Science and Technology for a long time. Since 2001, many research and development programs are given to hydrogen energy. During the 14th five-year plan, from 2021 to 2025, a key national R&D program of hydrogen energy technology was taken. And 4 areas will be focused. That is green hydrogen production and secure transfer system, safe storage and rapid transmission and distribution system, convenient hydrogen upgrading and efficient power system, comprehensive demonstration, hydrogen into thousands of homes. Now come to development of hydrogen industry. About 33 million tons of hydrogen was produced in China last year, which makes China become the world leader in hydrogen output. And according to analyze in 2060, there are 130 million tons per year of hydrogen will be required. About the hydrogen refueling station, by the end of last year, 358 hydrogen refueling stations have been constructed, and most of them are 35 megapascal stations, and 245 HRS are in use. The largest station is a Dashing hydrogen station with a daily capacity 4.8 tons each day. About electrolyzer, and 3 kinds of electrolyzer, alkaline, PEM, and SOEC are also developed in China. For example, alkaline water electrolyzer, 5 megawatt liver alkaline electrolyzer are in mass production. About hydrogen storage vessel and cylinder, there are more than 2,000 stationary vessels are used in hydrogen refueling station. The maximum pressure is 98 megapascal, and the water volume is 3 cubic meters. And there are more than 40,000 type 3 hydrogen cylinders are used in China. The maximum pressure is 70 megapascal. Water volume is 380 liters. Our national standard for type 4 hydrogen cylinder will be issued soon, and the pressure is 70 megapascal. We also develop test facilities for hydrogen industry. Here are 3 examples of such a test facility. One is metal hydrogen capability. The pressure, maximum pressure is 140 megapascal. Second is polymer hydrogen capability, and the temperature is from -60 to 200 degrees Celsius. Third is high pressure hydrogen impact test system. The maximum pressure is 140 megapascal. And we also develop standard of hydrogen production by water electrolysis. There are 2 standards developed by ISO, and we mostly this ISO standard into our national standard. About application, by the end of last year, the number of fuel cell vehicles in China reaches 12,682, accounting for about 20% in the world. And hydrogen vehicles are demonstrated in 2022 Winter Olympics. It is the world's largest demonstration of hydrogen vehicles. Other applications include forklifts, bicycle, fuel cell hybrid locomotive, and boat backup power, and aircraft. Then go to low carbon hydrogen project. Hydrogen are produced in 3 ways. One is hydrogen production by water electrolyzed with renewable energy. Second is photocatalytic water splitting on semiconductor-based photocatalysis. And third is hydrogen produced by nuclear energy. Here are some examples of low carbon hydrogen project. First is Ningxia Baofeng Green Hydrogen project. The capacity of electrolysis is 100 megawatts. Second is Sino operated Xinjiang Kuce Green Hydrogen demonstration project. And in this project, the electrolytic water hydrogen production is 20,000 tons per year. And the hydrogen storage surface tank, the storage capacity is about 210,000 standard cubic meters. The third project is green hydrogen ammonia demonstration project. In China, there are about 10 green hydrogen ammonia demonstration projects are in planning and construction. And the first is green hydrogen methanol demonstration project. It's is developed by China Coal at the Darling Institute of Chemicals Physics. And also green hydrogen Iceland, a comprehensive hydrogen energy utilization demonstration project on East Chinese Darling Iceland was put into operation last year. And then we also have comprehensive application of hydrogen energy project, a megawatt level demonstration station for the comprehensive utilization of hydrogen energy in Liu and East Chinese Anhui province. About hydrogen storage and transportation, and there are several projects on hydrogen pipeline projection. For example, Gansu Yumen oil field hydrogen pipeline project. The operating pressure is 2.5 megapascal. AP have a liquid hydrogen project in the east of China, Zhejiang province. And the liquid hydrogen production is 30 tons per day. And finally, I give some suggestion. Development of low carbon hydrogen relies on the development of low carbon hydrogen production technology. We should pay more attention on water electrolyzer and also a new technology. And application of low carbon hydrogen in different departments is very important. We should expand application of low carbon hydrogen. And also standard for low carbon hydrogen is very important. We need a standard to support low carbon hydrogen evaluation, testing, and verification. That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Yin Yang, for that very clear presentation. We see that China has many projects all along the value chain of green hydrogen. And it is in line with the presentation of Daria, where we see that China is leading the deployment of electrolyzers. For those who are participating from countries that have plans or are in the process of planning green hydrogen or renewable hydrogen or low hydrogen value chain, we want to have this workshop to raise awareness of what is needed, especially in the area of standards. At the beginning, we mentioned that it is very important for different participants in standard setting, not only taking the standards once it's developed, and that is the role of ISO. And our next presenter is from ISO. She will be presenting the role of ISO and how developing countries can participate in international standard setting. Roswitha Franz is head of planning and operations at the capacity building unit at ISO. Over to you, Roswitha.
Thank you very much, Juan Pablo, for this nice segue from a very practical example of hydrogen sector in China to zooming back out a little bit on the ISO process. So I'm going to share my screen and hope if you could just validate that you can see my screen.
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much for that. So Juan Pablo, and also thank you first of all to all the organizers and the cooperation partners, like we have heard from UNIDO and the Hydrogen Council, to really give us the opportunity to talk as well about ISO in general, its vision, and how we support also like developing countries in the work. As you mentioned, my name is Roswitha Franz. I'm working also at the Central Secretariat here in Geneva in the ISO capacity building work. And I was thinking before we take how developing countries can participate, I will go a little bit also about what ISO is and what is ISO's vision we have defined for ourselves. So ISO has defined its vision 2030 as a milestone to align with the UN SDGs. You will see when I will describe the process that ISO is built around an ethos of collaboration And we believe that standardization plays really a key role in transforming our world into a sustainable one. We believe that our standards contribute to make lives easier, safer, and better. And for this, we have identified key goals, strategic goals as well. Goal number one is like really to ensure that ISO standards are used everywhere once developed. Goal number two is making sure that the ISO standards are meeting global needs. It's really that our standards are market and demand driven. And I think the topic of this webinar is very accurate along those lines. And goal number three, we have heard quite often today already how important it is like to have developing countries around the table and have all voices heard in the standards development process. In addition to that, we have also now developed a sustainability program to really further outline ISO strategic vision in that direction and also outline the commitment we have vis-a-vis the UN SDGs and the Paris Agreement. The national standards have been recognized by the international community as a tool to support the decade of action for the SDGs. That's why the sustainability program has been put in action. On the slide, you can see like what is the outline of this, but what I would like to zoom in and link also to the topic of the webinar is like for the time being, the sustainability program focuses on two pillars. One is on climate action. The second one is diversity and inclusion. That's where we will give our focus for the time being. A few words on the climate action. This is like really to continue putting in place our commitment, our ISO's climate commitment. I'll be talking in a second. And we're also working towards the net zero transition, and a very important deliverable was launched on this topic also last year as part of COP, the IVO 42 we call it, which are the net zero guidelines. So what is ISO's commitment when it comes to climate? ISO has committed to really include climate consideration in all new and the revised international standards as well. And the second element to it is as well like to involve civil societies and those most vulnerable to climate change in the standards development process. So you see here again, the link back to developing countries as well. I've embedded in my presentation a couple of links for supporting reading and documents as well for those of interest. After this strategic overview, you can see now, let's move on, like what is ISO's mission, which really gives the core to the ISO members and their stakeholders, which I believe is also the audience of this webinar. Through our members and their stakeholders, we bring people together to agree on international standards that respond to global challenges. ISO standards support global trade, drive inclusive and equitable economic growth, advance innovation, and promote health and safety to achieve a sustainable future. I believe that the ISO standards for hydrogen sector we've already heard about, and we will be hearing later on as well, tick many of these objectives. So how does the ISO system work in a nutshell, really? Like, obviously, our core competence is to develop international standards, and our system consists of three main pillars. One is the ISO members in the countries who represents ISO as well. ISO is a member-driven organization with 168 members. Since this week, we got an additional member worldwide. And ISO consists of and derives mandates from its members as well. Through our members in the countries, experts are appointed around the world and brought together in the system to really share the knowledge and develop the voluntary consensus-based international standards. And the third pillar is the Central Secretariat here in Geneva, who coordinates the whole system and supports the members as well in executing the role as standards makers. So a few words on each of the topics. The ISO members, as I mentioned before, are the ones representing ISO in the country. It's through the ISO members, the experts are identified to participate in the international standard setting. It's also the mandate of an ISO member to approve standards by voting. And the system, our system also allows ISO members, any ISO member who is actively engaged, to come up with new standards proposals. This is also an important mechanism the system allows, that any country can also bring new topics on the table following a certain process. Talking about the experts who are really on the subject matter, like the really subject matter experts, like we call them. We are encouraging the ISO members to look for experts in different stakeholder groups. Those are the ones, the extra identified experts are those people who really contribute to the writing of the standards. All voices heard, we have heard about that, like really bringing the experts around the world, around the table to really get the drafting of a standard going. And as mentioned before, the experts are nominated by ISO members or sometimes also through the partner organizations like the UN. And the third pillar, as mentioned before, the ISO Central Secretariat facilitates the participation. It's really our role here in the Central Secretariat to provide a neutral platform for the experts to get together and to achieve consensus. And we're coordinating the whole development process. I've mentioned here that experts contributing to standards development should be from different stakeholder groups. We have defined our 7 key categories of stakeholders. We have here industry, commerce, government, consumer, labor, academia, standards application, and NGOs. So in an ideal world, the ISO member in each country should really identify experts using a mix of these categories to really ensure a balance of interests. And this is really in line then also with good standardization practice. So once we all follow this nice process on international standards and international standards are developed and published, who is then actually benefiting from them? We have heard already before from Daria the importance of international standards being used by regulators and in public policies. And this is really in line also with the WTO TPT agreement, who asks their members to really reference international standards in their public policy and technical regulations. And ISO standards are recognized as international standards. Another key beneficiary of the standards we've just heard already before is, of course, the industry to boost performance. And last but not least, also like the consumer at the end of the day, it gives also a kind of confidence to the consumer if a product or services is conform with an ISO standard. Now, as we have mentioned before, like I've mentioned that we have like 168 ISO members around the world. And an important fact is like 75% are from developing countries, which gives us also like a special role to play, like really also to how to serve for the needs of developing countries. And therefore, we have put in place an action plan, an ISO action plan for developing countries. And its current duration is from 2021 to 2025. It has been developed in very close consultation with our members in the developing countries. And here's in a nutshell what we are trying to contribute and to try to achieve as part of this action plan. Our goal or our impact statement here is like really to empower developing countries to actively contribute to the ISO system and also to fully benefit from the use of ISO standards, addressing social, economic, and environmental challenges. If you break that down a little bit, one level lower, there are really 2 main streams of works of our capacity building projects. Number 1 is like really to work with the ISO members in developing countries and their stakeholders to increase the use of ISO standards and the national adoption in support of UN SDG. And the second area here, which especially importance of this webinar is also like to ensure an increased effective participation of developing countries in ISO technical work. We have also a couple of other key initiatives as well around this action plan, because we also believe that we need to strengthen our members in the countries. So they are following good standardization practices, having strategic priorities in place to make standardization more effective. In the interest of time, I'm not going into details in that, but I think what is really important, and we heard that a few times already today, is like to moving from standards takers to standards makers. And how can we help from our side? What are we putting in place to increase the participation of developing countries? There are a couple of capacity building programs in this regard. One area is to enable participation. I'll talk about that later. Sponsorship programs. A second area is also like we're supporting with a methodology and guided process ISO members from developing countries to encourage to come with new standardization topics for international standardization. There is a twinning program in place as well, where an experienced country can work together with a less experienced country to get more actively engaged in standardization. And of course, an underlying pillar and important pillar is to learn overall about how the standardization, the ISO standardization development process works. Zooming further in is on how to bring like really the developing country voice to the ISO technical committee. Is it now on hydrogen or any other? We have a couple of sponsorship programs in place, which is applicable to also to different roles within the ISO system. One is the member choice sponsorship program, which is linked to the ISO members' national priorities. We're also providing sponsorship support for specific ISO projects like ISO standards under development for the duration, for the full development cycle of the selected standard. And there's also specific sponsorship available if a developing country member is holding a leadership position in a technical level. But again, for this conversation here, I think the most important one would be like, for example, it would be the ISO member choice sponsorship program. And here just a few facts on that. It's available for all ISO members who are eligible for capacity building support. Each country has 5 slots available per year. It is important that the member is an active member in the TC, like in the form of P membership to the respective TC, and also it should align to the national priorities as well. And then there are specific criteria as well for the candidate who will be granted sponsorship, and the request has to go through the ISO Central Secretariat. In a nutshell, depending, I guess, from where you as a participant to this webinar are you from an ISO member, or are you an expert or one of the stakeholders? If you're an ISO member, you know how we are working to support you to actively participate. We'll support to identify your national priorities. We encourage you then to participate in the respective TC linked to your national priorities. And it's important that you engage your national stakeholders in the standardization work. If you participant here to the webinar, you're one of the experts or one of the stakeholders, and you're not connected yet, you are as a member, we really encourage you to find and identify the ISO member in your country, seek opportunities to get involved in standardization, to bring your voice on the table, and obviously learn also about the process itself, because if you're very familiar with the process, then you're also more effective in the participation in international standardization. This brings me to the end of my presentation. I've also included some contact details in case you have any specific questions, but for the stakeholders and experts, really the message is to connect with your ISO member in the country and get the dialogue started from that side. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll give the floor back to you, Juan Pablo.
Thank you, Rosita. Thank you. Just to remind, if you have questions, please write them in the question and answer. We will be looking to answer all the questions, but it's very important to have your feedback, to have this dialogue. What is the topics that you're most interested? If you don't have questions, I have questions for the audience that you can have. Is your country participating, or is your country having plans to invest or to develop the hydrogen value chain? That's one question. And the second question is your country involved in the standard process? We have invited people from different developing countries that we know, that we heard that there are some projects under development. We have focused on standards bodies because they are the focal point for ISO, ministries related to the development of hydrogen, not necessarily the Ministry of Industry or the Ministry of Trade, but Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Environment, etc. So this is a call for those who are not yet participating to come to us, to ISO, to UNIDO, and to have support. Without going more into details, I will leave the floor to Andrei Chuvolev, who is the chair of the ISO TC 197 SC1, Hydrogen at Scale Horizontal Energy Systems. Please, again, put your questions in our question and answer. Over to you, Andrei.
Thank you, Juan Pablo. It's a great pleasure to be here and to provide more detail and more technical details on the work of ISO/TC 197 and the subcommittee 1. So the pictures you see here is just an example to illustrate the work and diversity of different locations where we had meetings. You can see on the right the meeting in China in 2017. Then in the middle, the work we were doing during COVID. You can see this little pictures there, and then the last plenary meeting of TC 197 and Subcommittee 1 in Sydney in Australia. Go to the next slide, please. So today I will provide the overview of the parent committee, ISO/TC 197 Hydrogen Technologies, that I chaired for over 9 years, and then the overview of the new committee, Subcommittee 1, specifically looking at the methodology for greenhouse gas assessment, already mentioned by Juan Pablo and Daria earlier, approach, principles, example, and schedule, and then talk about briefly relevant ISO/IC committees, and specifically the ad hoc group on the rail, and then finally the conformity assessment as an example, going through ICX, which will hopefully give you a comprehensive view on different sides of the technical standards development. Next slide, please. So ISO/TC 197 has this scope. As already mentioned, it was formed in 1990. It's a broad scope standardization in the field of systems and devices for production, storage, transport, measurement, and use of hydrogen, really covering the whole supply chain of hydrogen technologies. On the next slide, you will see the map that you can also find, of course, on the public site, but this is for your convenience. On the left, you can see participating members, and on the right, observing members. That number is actually growing very quickly in the last couple of years. So you can see we have 31 plenary meetings, and the next will be in November this year, hosted by our host today, which is UNIDO. If you look at the countries who are P members, there are some developing countries, but not much. So we certainly need to expand that number. So following Rosita's presentation before me explaining the process, so please join the hydrogen standard development work and become the standard makers. Next slide, please. So in the next 3 slides, I'll show you different stages of development so you can see the evolution. So it's kind of mentally divided before COVID, during COVID, and after COVID. Hydrogen Technologies Committee has been focusing traditionally on the core fundamental technologies for hydrogen. So the core experts include different production pathways and storage, mostly because this was the biggest challenge. Professor Chen showed some of the examples of the storage that hydrogen technologies used, both the large type 1, for example, tank. This was shown on one of the slides, as well as the compact tank. So that's a variety of applications, including the pressure vessels and the gas cylinders. So these were mostly the focus on that. And in the recent years, with the development and deployment of the hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, mostly light-duty vehicles, that has been the primary focus of the last years, to make sure we support the hydrogen infrastructure for mobility. So the standards that you see and highlighted in red, what has been published by 2020. And you can see, for example, in the vehicle components, there's a mention on alignment with the GTR 13. That's a global technical regulation and the UNFCE, the Working Party 29. that develops global technical regulations for hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. So you can see direct reference to that, which means that the ISO standards support directly the implementation of the global technical regulations, and this is very important. Fueling family of ISO 19880 is a very important package which supports the deployment, again, of the hydrogen, gaseous hydrogen infrastructure for light duty mobility and also expanding to the heavy duty mobility. So you can see there's diversity of standards there in dispensers, valves, compressors, hoses, fittings, and fuel quality for the refueling infrastructure. We go to the next slide. That covers the period between 2022, really during the COVID time, where we worked remotely. So it was reflected on Professor Chen slide when he mentioned electrolysis. So we actually split it into parts, and one to address dynamic performance and safety. That's with a reference to a renewable energy connection and application. And the other standard, you can see testing for grid service. This is another important use of the water electrolysis technology where it can help balance the grid, again, which will be fed particularly going forward through the renewable energy sources. Very important work on safety. You can see ISO TR 15916, another revision specifically related to material compatibility and expanding the liquid hydrogen chapter. We anticipate that liquid hydrogen will play more and more significant role. It was reflected in Darius' presentation on the trade flows, and what was also shown in one of the slides of Professor Chen related to pipelines. So material compatibility is a critical component. On the fueling family side, what you see on the right-hand side, important standards on sampling. So you can appreciate how important the fuel quality is for mobility using the fuel cells. So making sure that there's no contamination of the fuel cells, the sampling is important, particularly done at a very high pressure. O-rings, that's another important point to prevent the leaks. So it's both the operation kind of performance side, but also, of course, the safety, because we want to prevent the high pressure leaks in there. The very important work you can see in the middle on the right, fueling protocols for compressed hydrogen. It's really focused on heavy duty. You can see -3 high flow for heavy duty road vehicles. Yeah, as you know, there's a significant anticipated rollout of the heavy duty Class 8 trucks, whether it's compressed or liquid. This one is focusing on a high pressure compressed gas. And -2 document, it's the communication requirements to ensure high efficiency, high performance, and also the safety of refueling. And last but not least, fuel system components for compressed hydrogen vehicles. That's the joint working group with one of our key partners, ISO/TC 22 road vehicles, subcommittee 41. That's on the gaseous fuels. Next slide, please. Finally, going forward, and what the very recent work we approved, you can see at the top liquid and SLH2, which means subcooled liquid. That's a new liquid hydrogen technology, which kind of helps to eliminate the boil off and improve the efficiency of fueling. These are revision of the very old standards. One of them is from the last millennia, from 1999, the other from 2006. Those standards were influenced by participation from NASA at that point. And now that's driven really by the industry and by the heavy duty industry for road mobility to make sure we have the standards in there. And you can see the CCH2, it means cryo-compressed applications. That's a new technology. Yeah, that's a new project we just approved, and the new working group will be created to develop the connected standard for that. Now we go to the sustainability aspect within the subcommittee. One that we established last year, we started the work on the methodology for determining greenhouse gas emissions associated with production, condition, and transport. That's the technical specification. I'll be talking a little later. Next slide, please. So these are the working groups. We're not going to very detailed. You actually can find, of course, this information on the site, but I rearranged it for your convenience a little differently. You can see the working groups are not in order, but they're kind of lined up based on the column on the right, which has the sequential numbers in there. So you can see the liquid hydrogen is grouped, and hydrogen fuel quality, which has been published, and you see a lot of words revision. We are revising the standards that were developed. And then you can see the document 17268, which we now split into separate parts to allow multiple mobility applications, including rail, which I'll be talking very shortly about. So variety of mobility is important to support. There are different flows and different protocols that used for, say, light duty and medium duty vehicles, and also buses on one side, and for the heavy duty trucks on the other. Plus, as I say, there will be cryo-compressed application for heavy duty mobility, and also rail that is coming. You can see those standards from the fueling family, gaseous hydrogen fueling stations, and different components that are being finalized, and also revision of the standards for gaseous hydrogen fuel containers or tanks, and TPRDs. That's the safety device that opens at the when reacts to the temperature and releases safely the gas. The work on the pressure vessels, cylinders and tubes for stationary storage, and then the fueling protocols that I mentioned, and the vehicle components, and the electrolyzer. So that's the comprehensive view of the standards we're developing, our working groups developing right now. Next slide, please. So now we go into the subcommittee one that's been developed, established last year, specifically to address the scaling up and horizontal energy systems. That's really where the hydrogen is the central link in the energy chain. And you can see the scope addressing issues that TC 197 parent committee is not addressing, which is focusing on core technologies. There will be a separate slide a little later to highlight that, but this is the scope. I'm highlighting here two words. Well, sustainability, of course, is very important, and coordination with variety of technical committees and other stakeholders to address the myriad of new applications that hydrogen can bring on the table. Of course, testing, certification, and placement, these are also very important aspects that we are specifically looking at. So on the next slide, you see the map. For that, similar to one, so we have already 22 P members. Of course, we welcome more. And if you check the names of the countries in there, there are not many developing countries. So this is really the opportunity to become the standard makers and including the sustainability aspect. The next slide shows the structure for the information. So you can see this blending of colors on the left-hand side is the work that we just discussed related to the ISO TC 197. And on the sort of right-hand side, the activities that are being mostly planned within the subcommittee 1 and the new program sustainability. You can see at the bottom in there where the methodology that we mentioned, we'll discuss imminently in the next slides, is being developed, as well as the other aspects of sustainability that Daria mentioned. Future certification standard and other aspects of sustainability related to hydrogen will be developed there. The idea is that we keep the old programs existing, we're just expanding them to include the new scope in there. We're also chairing the technical advisory board with regional representation. Each program is led by a technical program director and also special advisor for developing countries who serves both the TC-197 parent committee, subcommittee 1, Professor Jinyan Sen. Next slide, please. So that's really a very good explanation on the division of scope. So TC-197 focuses on basic requirements on core technologies for hydrogen, and you can see production, storage, handling, built environment, and conventional mobility, which really relates to the road mobility, light, medium, heavy duty. While the TC-197 focuses on applications of those technologies where hydrogen is a central link. So it could be the overlap, obviously, with other fuels. There was a question about ammonia, very good question. This is a tricky one. How we handle it, we will look at ammonia, for example, LHC, from the point of methodology for greenhouse gas footprint assessment solely. But looking at the specific other scope, we need to think how we address that. But you can see also coordination with variety of different stakeholders related to renewables and energy storage, multi-fuel system, various sustainability aspect. The ISO TC-207 was mentioned, environmental management, as well as for example, subcommittee 7 on climate change. So we're collaborating obviously with those different testing, different applications, including the residential. It's all kind of in the scope of collaboration. So next slide, please. Now, specifically, well, that slide Daria already showed, so I'm not going to talk about it too much. So please, the next one. But the basic idea, as we explained, that we developed first the first step, that is a technical specification which serves the global document, so that the first movers can test it, and then we get to the development of the suite of standards, starting with the 2024. But within 2023, and you will see the schedule in a couple of slides, that's the idea. So here, as we discussed, we need to have a mutually agreed methodology for determining the greenhouse gas footprint. It's the first step and a very important part of the sustainability dimension that we're addressing. On the bar, kind of on the left corner, you can see the title page of it's a working draft. Is submitted by PHE, which will show on the next slide, but this is really the general approach. We have hydrogen production pathways, multiple, including electrolysis, SMR with CCS, biomass, and so forth. We have hydrogen conditioning, means conversion, whether it's the liquid, whether it's derivative like ammonia, or whether it's the LOHC, and then transport using different carriers. Next slide, please. So that's the guiding principles that were developed by IPHE, which is the International Partnership for Hydrogen Fuel Cells in the Economy. The document, you can see the title page on the right. It's available on the IPHE website. You can load it, but these are the guiding principles that we agreed with IPHE and adopt. And that's the foundational for this one. It should be inclusive. It should be flexible. It should be transparent, it should be comparable, and it should be practical. So these are the key words that are very important. And you can see on a comparable, it means apples to apples. So Daria mentioned we are a data organization from the Hydrogen Council. Well, ISO is the science-based organization and also data-driven. So comparing of apples to apples is extremely important. This example Daria gave about 2 and 2 may not necessarily be equal if you're using a different or non-consistent methodology for comparison. Next slide, please. You can appreciate, I cannot go through the details because that alone will probably take the whole day to go through different details, but this is to give you a flavor. So on the top left, you can see kind of the scheme, and that shows the phases of the methodology development, kind of phase 1, phase 2. In our technical specification, would like to be comprehensive in the scope, extraction, it means, production, process, delivery, and energy produced and energy purchased for determining the carbon GHG footprint. Out of the scope, there are other things at this point: manufacturing equipment, capex emissions, other sources of indirect emissions are excluded at this stage. Next slide, please. Evaluation methods. This is one of the critical points, and again, underscore the importance of using key ISO standards for that. Those are developed by TC 207, as mentioned, and Subcommittee 7 of ISO. So 3 specifically most important standards that are being referenced is the, you can see them highlighted, 14067. It's a carbon footprint of products, and the 2 life cycle analysis key standards, 14040 and 14044. So they would allow for the solid foundation for comparison, and those represent universally recognized methodologies to study the carbon footprint of fuel production in principle. So we're applying those specifically to hydrogen. So the next slide, please. As an example, it shows electrolysis production pathway. You can see I kind of combined 2 things in one for convenience. So these are the product system that is being taken into account. And again, this is example. There are a number of technology pathways that are being analyzed in a similar way. So you have the product system. The dotted line is what's included in the assessment, treatment, the whole electrolysis, purification, compression, and then you have a hydrogen as a product. And then emission allocation scheme, which is on the energy based. And this one example shows that if you have a co-product like oxygen that's being used as a product, then those emissions are being removed from the inventory for hydrogen. They're allocated to oxygen. However, if oxygen is vented, for example, which may be the case, then of course all emissions will be allocated to the hydrogen footprint. Next slide, please. So the milestones, if you would like to join, please, we have the next meeting actually at the end of this month. The working draft has been circulated. The comments, you can see deadline passed and was submitted already. Quite a few comments. So in a couple of weeks, we have the first meeting. Then we circulate committee draft early April. And then the second meeting already planned end of June in Paris at AFNOR to discuss comments. Circulation in September, draft technical specification. And the final meeting before COP is we finalize all the comments and essentially prepare for publication. So we'll go through the regular ISO process for publication, but the TS essentially can be presented at COP as we're planning. So nota bene is very important as we agree at this stage to make sure we can do what we plan to do here. In case of the blocking points, this will be going to the informative annex and will be treated later when we start developing the suite of individual standards for production, conditioning, and transportation. Next slide, please. So other relevant committees, as mentioned, ICTC 22 road vehicles, and there are two specifics, electric vehicles and gaseous fuels. So these are two critical for mobility, for road mobility. ICTC 58 gas cylinders, they're really looking at transportable cylinders and the composite tanks. Two environmental committees, environmental management and subcommittee 7 on climate change. The important committees from the IEC side, explosive atmospheres, and specifically 131J developed in the hazardous areas classification, ISO TC 105 fuel cells, and very important, we will be talking about in a couple of slides on conformity assessment. And then the current liaisons that we have on the rail, on the rolling stock, and maritime. The next slide will highlight the activities we plan for rail. I know some developing countries specifically are very much interested, and that creates the blueprint for other applications, which we can do based on the ISO 197 existing documents. So we created the ad hoc group, H2 Rail, together with these two committees and ISO and IEC, with the objective to develop and implement the roadmap for hydrogen standards for rail applications. So we have actually launched the implementation plan, which will go through the new proposals and establishment of a number of joint working groups under subcommittee 1. And the rail committees will provide the new work item proposals and nominate conveners. So this is the list of standards. And you can see those have been developed for road mobility and will be, those will be used as the core, the foundation for those standards. And the new standards specifically for rail applications will be developed depending on the specialization and number of experts in those committees. So for fueling connectors together with ICTC 269, for all other standards related to the compressed hydrogen storage system on board, whether it's the containers, components, and then a very important fueling protocol and refueling for the requirements for the compressed gas hydrogen refueling stations. They will be developed together with the IIC TC9 based on the earlier developed standards by ISO TC 197. Next slide. So this is the final aspect of I wanted to present. So the question is what happens after, right? Standard is being developed. If it is taken by the national bodies, which we will hope, who developed that, then the next step is actually apply it in practice. Those standards very often have been referenced in national regulations and then become part of that. And it's very important that then the equipment that's being built is compliant with those standards requirement. And the process for it is called conformity assessment. And what you see on the screen right now is the example. It's not the only example in the world, but the reason I'm showing it because it's based on the IEC, which is the oldest standard development organization since 1904, which actually was the founding father of ISO in 1947. And since 1996, as you see, there's a new body developed, which is called ICX, which is the purpose of it is to do the conformity assessment, whether it's equipment, assembly services, and now even the personnel. So you can see on the next slide, what's significant is that if IEC started first specifically for electric equipment, now it's going beyond electric and actually to mechanical components. So that certification, which is specifically for the flammable gases, and of course hydrogen is a fuel, will cover both mechanical and electrical requirements, and even personnel certification for the services within the future hydrogen economy. And I think the images you can see here, they're pretty telling. On the top. In the middle, you can see the fuel cells, the fueling stations, the vehicles, and specifically dispensers. So if we go to the next slide, that just shows it's the first of a kind. It's really the new document that ICX developed specifically for the certification of hydrogen dispensers. Though we're finalizing, it's going to the through the DIS and then FD stage, thorough development of the dispenser standard. You see 19880-2, and IEC has developed its own document to help do the conformity assessment on hydrogen dispensers. And at the bottom, you can see that's the a program that can actually certify personnel their competence based on another ISO document, basic considerations for safety of hydrogen systems, which is another very important aspect. Next slide, please. I think that's the last slide. Thank you very much for your time. And you can see hydrogen cooling the earth. That's what we expect is going to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrei, for this excellent presentation and overview of the work, the technical work that the different technical committees and subcommittees are working and envisage to work. I have seen that there are many questions out there. Let me just, before we go to the questions, I think it's very important to stress out the importance for developing countries to participate and to be aware of these standards, the certification process, everything that is around that standard, because in their countries that have projects, this will be needed. And it is completely necessary to anticipate the needs of those countries that are looking to develop their green hydrogen industry, green hydrogen value chain, anticipate what is needed. It's not only about the standard participation, it's about making that standard conform to the standard, having all the elements to conform to the standard. Who is going to assess that against that standard? Is it an auditor? Is it an inspector? Who is the institution that has the competences to assess against a standard, to conform these conformity assessments that are needed? Having said that, well, we have seen developing countries more and more come up with their different roadmaps. Some roadmaps on green hydrogen may focus on different areas depending on the characteristics of the country. Some countries aim to work more on mobility. You have seen throughout the presentation there are standards for mobility. Some countries focus on the export of derivatives, and as you can see, there are standards all along the value chain. There's a question on the detection of H2 flammable. Was posed early. There's one standard
I
for the
actually
detection.
responded.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect. We
That's from our good friend Giacomo Frigo, whom I've known for many years. So anticipating questions like this, that's how ISO system works. We welcome new work item proposals from the P members. They can do it anytime. So what Giacomo noted, there was a standard that was published in 2010 and hasn't been revised for various reasons. I will just save it for the sake of time, but certainly we welcome a new proposal from a P member to revise the standard, and we will look at that, and we'll be happy to collaborate on that. There was also other comment, Juan Pablo, if you allow me to jump.
Please.
There's a standard on the let me see. I think it was the comment. I just lost it. About the supply standards for the supply chain of hydrogen, overall supply chain. Well, that's the reason we have a subcommittee one, because if you can, as I tried to explain relatively briefly, the history, the focus was on the core technologies. That's what the industry needed to make sure that, all the safety aspects, material compatibility or storage and other things were lined up. So now the hydrogen energy pathway is developing so quickly. We kind of are behind. That's why we have subcommittee one. We're addressing the large scale applications. We're addressing the new applications. So we hope that example I gave with rail, for example, it shows how we can proceed. We need to look at maritime. We need to look at other applications together, residential, for example, which is another big sector, specifically looking at the pipelines and stuff like that. But if you break it out on components, we absolutely have standards for production, certainly, and built environment. That's very well defined in the components of that. In terms of the distribution, sure, the ISO TC 58, for example, focuses on tube trailer distribution. There's a ISO TC 220 looking at the cryogenic applications, not necessarily TC 197, but the other committees that cover the transportation of all gases, including hydrogen. So delivery, for example, of the hydrogen through compressed hydrogen through the tube trailers or liquid hydrogen through the liquid tankers is covered by other committees. TC 197 doesn't have to look at it. And of course, the ISO TC 22 road vehicles, two subcommittees I mentioned cover issues related to the vehicles in that. But other aspects of supply chain, again, related to the new applications, they are in development. So we're working on it as we speak, but that's the best we can do at the moment. I think by getting involved, you bring this new issues to the table. And again, we're looking for the new work item proposals. What is of interest? There's another question about the energy efficiency, for example. Well, we haven't dealt with that. And whether it belongs within TC 197, maybe. It's like we doing the new standards for sustainability. Obviously, it's all new elements that we are developing right now. So bring us the new work item proposal. We'll look at it. There are definitely models that have been developed earlier. If we want to have something very specific and turn it into a standard or technical specification, how to do the energy efficiency calculations, bring us the proposal and we will look at it. Currently, we don't have it within the ISO TC 197.
There is one procedural question that is hard for developing countries to make long and expensive travels. How much of the meetings are planned to be remote or hybrid to stimulate participation?
Well, I showed you the picture through the COVID time, when we had significant participation through the 100% hybrid meeting. I think people appreciate that hybrid meeting brings probably the half value. Of course, you can involve a lot of people, but the interaction and networking is priceless, and you cannot do it through the Teams or through Zoom, particularly when you're discussing very technical issues. Like we're talking about for example, methodology or a fueling protocol. My personal experience that when it's pure hybrid like we have right now, it works very well. When you try to do, pure virtual, when you do the hybrid, there are issues. We try to be very creative how we do that. But honestly, nothing can replace the efficiency and the productiveness of the in-person meeting. But we do our best to accommodate both ways.
Thank you. We're approaching the end of our webinar. We really appreciate the time. I will just give one last word for our panelists, if they want to say one last comment. One thing that I want to stress out, please get in contact with your national counterparts that are responsible for standardization. There is a path there. Please don't hesitate to send us your questions there. Also to look for support in these areas. UNIDO has a global partnership program on hydrogen in industry. And it is our mandate to support our member countries in these industrialization processes. Without that, if any of the panelists would like to have one last comment, please, you're welcome. In the meantime, I would like the participants to put in the questions a last wish. If you are interested to know more about standards on green hydrogen, related to the green hydrogen value chain, please share the topics that you would like to know more about. It is really important for us to prepare this type of webinars really to a demand that we see. So if you have time, please put in the question, what is the topic that you would like to see in the future, and we will prepare and see the demand and prepare accordingly a webinar or a technical meeting.
Juan Pablo, this one question I see at the just typed, how can we participate in the work group? I presume you're talking about the working group on the methodology. Well, the standard, I think Rosita is explained. You need to be the P member, so you need to reach out to your national body. You need to join and see if there is a mirror committee. Join the mirror committee, and then the national body will recommend you. So it's a straightforward process. You'll be registered within the working group. That's how everybody works, and there's no other way to participate. It has to be through the national body. The other option, of course, there's a liaisons, like we have liaison with UNIDO, with ARENA, with APHE, with Hydrogen Council. Depending on the type of the liaison, then there is an opportunity to participate through that channel. But generally, if you just work for your company or independent consultant, acting through a national body is the way to go.
And without any more questions, then allow me to thank our panelists, Andrea, Roswitha, Jingyang, and Andre, for their contribution to this webinar. And we look forward to have more collaboration on this end. Thank you very much for all the participants. Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon. And I hope that this webinar has been fruitful for your knowledge. Please stay in contact. Don't hesitate to contact any of the presenters and UNIDO, of course. Thank you very much again.